A bucket crashed, dirty water racing across the marble floor. The man in the suit laughed loud enough for the whole lobby to hear, taunting the black cleaning lady as if she were invisible. What he didn't know buried in her pocket was the truth that could burn his empire to the ground. The air in the lobby thickened, as if every breath had to fight its way past the tension. He leaned forward, his cologne sharp, his grin sharpened into cruelty, a predator playing with prey. The dirty water soaked through her trousers, chilling her legs, yet her face remained unreadable, a mask perfected over decades, one that gave nothing away but concealed everything, including the fact that she was not here to clean floors, but to clean out something far filthier. Phones began to rise, not from compassion, but from the hunger for spectacle. The gold watch on his wrist caught the light as he tilted it toward the lens of his live stream, each frame designed to feed the faceless crowd beyond the glass of their screens. Behind her cart, a leather case waited silently, its brass initials gleaming like a whisper in the dark, holding the kind of proof that could unravel boardrooms, careers, and reputations in minutes. He barked an order, his voice echoing against the marble walls, but she moved with the slow grace of someone who had already decided how this would end. Every step she took seemed measured, almost rehearsed, as though she was keeping time with a clock only she could hear, a clock that was counting down to the moment the roles in this charade would flip forever. She bent to pick up the scattered paper towels, her fingers steady, her eyes fixed not on the floor, but on his reflection in the polished metal column behind him, watching him the way a hawk watches a mouse. Somewhere in the back of the room, an elevator chimed, and for a fleeting second, the sound carried with it the weight of change, as if the doors that were about to open would decide who walked away intact and who walked away ruined. The elevator doors slid open with a soft hiss, spilling warm light onto the cold marble. Two figures stepped out, one in a sharp gray suit, the other with the weathered hands of a man who had built his life on hard work. Their eyes flicked between the scene and the man in the tailored jacket, still standing over her with a smirk, and though neither spoke, the weight in their gaze was enough to make a few bystanders shift uncomfortably, as if they all sensed that whatever was unfolding was about to tip into something irreversible. The man in the suit stepped closer, his voice even, almost casual, as he asked what the problem was. Before she could answer, the suited bully cut in, weaving a story designed to sound official words, polished with just enough authority to make it dangerous for anyone to question him. She listened, silent, letting him dig his own grave one sentence at a time, her hands folding a paper towel with the same precision one might use to fold a contract before signing it. Around them, the air buzzed with digital life. His phone was still held high, its little red light blinking a beacon calling in strangers from every corner of the internet to watch him wield his temporary power. The comments flew across his screen faster than he could read them, a stream of cheering voices and mocking encouragement, none of them realizing they were about to witness their own reversal. Her cart sat a few steps away, the leather case untouched, its brass latch glinting each time the overhead lights swayed faintly with the building's air system. The smirk on his face widened as he blocked her path to it, his voice dropping low so only she could hear, not knowing that in less than half an hour, that same voice would crack in front of everyone watching. She raised her eyes, calm, unwavering, and for the first time, something in his stance faltered as though some part of him recognized the look of someone who didn't fear the game, but owned the board it was being played on. He straightened his tie and told her to apologize to the company, his tone sharp, rehearsed, dripping with the confidence of someone who believed the whole building belonged to him. A ripple moved through the small crowd, a hush that didn't come from respect, but from the anticipation of blood in the water. She didn't flinch, didn't blink, her gaze fixed squarely on him like she was studying a case she'd already solved, while his phone, still raised, broadcast every second to hundreds of strangers who thought they knew the ending. She bent, slowly, to return a bottle of cleaning solution to the cart, her movements unhurried, almost ceremonial. and then her hand brushed the leather case just lightly enough to make the brass clasp catch the light again. The man didn't notice, too busy addressing his audience, narrating her defiance with the theatrical venom of a schoolyard bully. But a few in the crowd noticed her touch that case and began to lean in. From somewhere in the hallway, a second phone began recording. Closer this time, the lens trained on both of their faces. The tension in the air thickened, every eye locked on the standoff, and beneath it all, the hum of the building's air vents sounded almost like a low drum roll. Her pulse was steady, her breath even. But her mind was sharpening because she knew the moment was almost here, and once she made her move, there would be no way back. A faint chime echoed from the far end of the corridor, the elevator again, and her eyes flicked toward it. Just for a second, as the silver doors began to part, someone important was arriving. Someone who could either kill this moment or make it the one that changed everything. From the elevator stepped a tall woman in a navy blazer, her hair tied back in a sleek twist, the kind that said she had no time for nonsense. Her eyes scanned the scene in seconds, the man with the phone, the woman in the uniform, the ring of silent spectators, and narrowed just slightly. Behind her, a security officer followed, his broad frame blocking part of the hallway, sealing the scene like a stage with no exit. The bully's smirk twitched, but he quickly turned his phone toward them, as though their arrival was just another prop in his little performance. The newcomer spoke in a calm, clipped tone, asking for an explanation. Before she could finish, he jumped in, spinning a polished tale of incompetence, disrespect, and damage to company property. His words dripped with false authority, each one carefully chosen to make her the villain. The woman in the uniform simply listened, her expression a perfect mask, like a poker player holding the winning hand. The security officer's gaze lingered on her not with suspicion, but with something closer to familiarity. A faint crease formed between his brows, as though he was trying to place a face he had seen somewhere far from the scent of bleach and floor wax. Still, he said nothing, simply stepping aside, waiting. The brass clasp of the leather case winked again under the lights, as if inviting someone to ask what was inside. He laughed then, loud and performative, gesturing toward her cart as though it contained nothing of value. But she didn't look at the cart. She looked directly into his phone's lens, her eyes steady and unflinching, and in that frozen moment, it was as if she was speaking not to him, but to every unseen viewer watching from the other side of the glass. The seconds stretched thin, the kind that make every heartbeat sound louder than the room itself. He leaned in toward his phone, feeding it more venom, claiming she was a danger to the company, his voice rising in that smug rhythm that comes when someone believes the audience is already on their side. A few chuckles rippled from his supporters in the comments, not knowing they were seconds from choking on them. She didn't look at him. She took a single step toward her cart, the soft squeak of her shoes against the marble almost defiant. Her fingers curled around the leather handle of the case, the sound of the clasp snapping open, slicing through the stale air. No one in the room breathed, not the security officer, not the suited woman, not even the man holding the phone. Inside lay a neat stack of documents, embossed seals, winking gold, and on top a card black, heavy, unmistakably official with her name in bold print and a title none of them could have imagined. The man's smirk faltered, just slightly, like a glass beginning to crack from the inside. She didn't pull the card out yet. She let it sit there, letting the image burn into the crowd's memory. Then she spoke for the first time, her voice low, deliberate, not to him, not to the room, but to someone on the other end of her phone as she dialed. "Chairman," she said, each syllable smooth as steel, "we have a situation." And in that instant, the bully's world didn't just tilt, it began to collapse. The speakerphone caught the voice instantly rich, authoritative, the kind that could silence a boardroom with a single word. "Elena, are you safe?" the voice asked, audible to every ear in the corridor. The man with the phone froze mid-breath, the live stream still rolling, his audience now hearing a name they had never been given, and behind it, the tone of someone who didn't request answers. He demanded them. "I'm fine," she replied evenly, eyes never leaving the man in front of her. "But I believe it's time you hear, firsthand, how your regional leadership operates when they think no one is watching." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Phones adjusted for better angles. The man's smirk had drained into a rigid mask, but the twitch in his jaw betrayed the storm inside. The suited woman stepped closer, her arms folding, gaze locked on the bully, as if already calculating the paperwork his exit would require. The security officer shifted his stance, no longer blocking her path but subtly edging toward him instead. And still, the leather case stayed open, its contents like silent witnesses, each page ready to testify in ways that would scorch through policies, reputations, and careers in one sweep. The man swallowed hard, and for the first time, he looked at the phone in his hand, not as a weapon, but as a loaded gun he had been pointing at his own chest the entire time. Somewhere far away in the building, the ding of another elevator echoed, but this one didn't feel like routine. This one felt like judgment walking up the hall. The crowd instinctively shifted as the second elevator opened, revealing 3 figures in tailored suits whose presence seemed to press the air down around them. The man in the center's silver hair, sharp eyes, and the calm of someone who had signed documents worth more than entire buildings scanned the hallway in a single sweep. He didn't look at the cameras. He didn't need to. The way people straightened under his gaze told him everything. The man with the phone lowered it half an inch, like prey sensing the predator had arrived. "Elena," the silver-haired man said, his voice carrying across the marble like a verdict. "Shall we continue this conversation here? Or in the boardroom?" The name, her real name, landed like a thunderclap among the crowd, turning whispers into a wave of realization. The security officer's jaw tightened, the suited woman's arms uncrossed, and the bully's eyes darted toward the open leather case as if finally understanding what it meant. But Elena didn't move yet. She let the silence do the work, drawing the tension tighter, making every breath in the room feel earned. The live stream audience ballooned, comments flashing so quickly they blurred into a waterfall of disbelief and anticipation. Viewers demanded answers, theories sparked, and a dozen phones now recorded from every angle, each one unknowingly capturing the moment where arrogance would meet its reckoning. The bully opened his mouth, searching for words, but only managed a shallow exhale because somewhere deep inside, he knew this was no longer his stage. Then Elena closed the leather case with a deliberate click. It was the kind of sound you could feel in your chest, the kind that meant something had been decided. She didn't raise her voice, didn't need to. "Let's do it here," she said softly. "They should all hear it." The murmur in the crowd dimmed to a near silence, the kind that makes even the smallest sound feel deafening. Elena stepped forward, the echo of her shoes against the marble like a countdown, and the ring of people instinctively widened to let her pass. The man with the phone shifted his weight, clutching it tighter now not as a tool of power, but as a lifeline. He could feel the eyes on him, the shifting current in the room, the subtle but undeniable slide of control into her hands. She placed the leather case on a side table, the polished wood reflecting the gold lettering of her name, and unlatched it again, this time with intention. Pages were lifted, but not shown. Yet. Instead, she glanced at the silver-haired man and the others who had arrived with him, a silent agreement passing between them that made the bully's shoulders stiffen. Somewhere in the crowd, a phone camera zoomed in, the audience at home holding their breath without knowing why. The suited woman stepped closer to Elena, murmuring something that only the nearest few could catch, and Elena's faint nod was all it took to make the security officer subtly reposition himself, not beside her, but directly in the bully's line of sight. It was no longer an audience watching a spectacle. It was a witness stand being built in real time, and the man in the middle of it was starting to realize exactly where he stood. She looked around the circle, her gaze slow, deliberate, touching the faces of each person recording, almost as if she were inviting them to keep going to make sure every angle, every second, would be preserved. Then her eyes landed back on him, her voice steady but sharp enough to draw blood. "In a moment," she said, "everyone here will understand why this ends today." Elena slid a single document from the leather case and placed it flat on the polished table, the embossed seal catching the light so sharply that even the back row leaned forward. It was not a contract, not a report, but a formal appointment letter, signed in ink so fresh it still carried a faint sheen. Her name stood above a title that instantly redrew the hierarchy in the room, and for the man with the phone, it redrew his fate. He laughed once too loud, too brittle, as if the sound could glue the pieces of his crumbling authority back together. But no one laughed with him. The security officer stepped closer, his shadow crossing the man's shoes, while the silver-haired executive folded his hands behind his back like a judge awaiting the guilty plea. 3 weeks, Elena began, her voice carrying through the space. 3 weeks I've stood in this building, dressed in a uniform you thought defined me. 3 weeks of watching you measure people's worth by what they wore, not what they knew. And in that time, I've documented every word, every action, every decision you thought would vanish into thin air. She reached into the case again and lifted a thick stack of printed images, security footage stills, time-stamped, crystal clear. In each one, his face appeared, speaking, gesturing, smirking in ways that needed no subtitles. Whispers broke out in the crowd. A few phones trembled as their owners recorded every damning frame. His phone, the one that had been streaming, now hung slack in his grip, its red light still blinking, capturing the moment he realized his own broadcast had become the world's evidence against him. Her gaze locked with his, unblinking. "I wanted an audience," she said, voice low but lethal. "Now you have one, and they've seen enough to know who you are." The paper in her hand was only the beginning. From the leather case, she drew out folders, each labeled in bold, deliberate letters, laying them out one by one on the table like a surgeon placing instruments before an operation. Every file was a piece of the puzzle documented incidents, witness statements, financial reports that bled numbers like wounds. The man's eyes darted from page to page, reading just enough to recognize the dates, the names, the damning precision. The security officer didn't need an order. He stepped closer still, his stance a quiet wall between the man and any escape. The suited woman began photographing the documents in silence, while the silver-haired executive simply observed, letting the weight of the evidence speak louder than any accusation. Elena's voice never rose, but it sliced through the air with surgical accuracy. "This is not about one insult. It's about a culture you created, a place where talent left. Clients walked away, and people stayed silent out of fear. And for every day you thought you were untouchable, the damage spread further than you could ever see." Phones in the crowd buzzed as the live stream hit new numbers, the audience beyond these walls swelling into the tens of thousands. Every comment now was a verdict. Disbelief, outrage, and the sharp edge of public judgment that no PR statement could dull. His phone slipped lower in his hand until it hung at his side, still streaming his own undoing. A bead of sweat traced down his temple, but he didn't wipe it away, maybe afraid the movement would look like defeat. Then she paused, closing the final folder with quiet finality. "All of this," she said, tapping the stack, "goes before the board, today. And every person in this room is a witness." The silver-haired executive stepped forward at last, his voice steady but carrying the weight of finality. "Effective immediately," he said. "Your position is terminated for conduct detrimental to this company's integrity and reputation." The words didn't just fall, they landed, heavy and cold, sealing the fate that had been spiraling toward this man since the moment he kicked over that mop bucket. Gasps rippled through the crowd, and somewhere in the back, A phone beeped as a viewer clipped the moment for the internet to devour. The man opened his mouth to protest, but whatever he was about to say died in the air. There was nothing to counter the tide. Now, no bluff, no smirk, no spin, strong enough to rewrite what had just unfolded in front of hundreds of eyes and thousands of screens. Security moved in, their presence not aggressive but absolute, and for the first time, the man's posture broke completely. His shoulders sagging under the weight of his own arrogance turned to ash. Helena didn't gloat. She didn't need to. She closed the leather case with the same calm she had carried since the first drop of dirty water touched her shoes, then turned to the crowd, her voice clear enough for every recording device to catch. "Let this stand as proof," she said, "that silence is the soil where injustice grows and exposure is the sun that kills it." As security led him away, the live stream captured his final walk down the marble corridor, every step echoing like a reminder that power without character is nothing more than a borrowed crown. The elevator doors swallowed him, and for a heartbeat, the 47th floor was silent, until the quiet broke into a low, rising wave of applause. Helena lifted her case, glanced once at the silver-haired man, and began walking toward the boardroom. She had work to do not just to rebuild a department, but to change the very fabric of the company. And as the cameras followed her, the world outside already knew this wasn't the end of a scandal. It was the start of a revolution.